Hi there, and welcome back to our series on cancer and suicide clusters in schools. We're exploring causation and solutions. Today, our special expert guest is Shelley Wright, and Shelley is an elementary teacher who's been teaching in Ontario, Canada for 28 years. And over the last 8 years, she's passed resolutions, including wired technology to support students, pregnant staff, and environmentally sensitive teachers. She's learned the value of independent research not tied to the industry. And through her personal and professional experience, she's discovered that what is healthy for children and sensitive students or teachers is healthy for everyone. So welcome, Shelley. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
So how about we start out with probably a very predictable question. I'm sure you've been asked it many times, but what has particularly inspired you to enter the profession of teaching?
Well, I love children and I love singing, dancing, and acting, and I love learning new things. And I just want to make a difference in this world and inspire children to become lifelong learners.
Fabulous. And so, since we're talking about technology today, do you personally like using technology in your classroom?
I love technology. I have a laptop that's hardwired to a white screen and a whiteboard, it's called, and students can access a variety of programs that they'd like to. I also have Ethernet adapters attached to iPads, so my ELL or English language learners can use those lightning adapters and Ethernet cables to download programs for their iPads for learning. So it's pretty exciting in my classroom.
Wonderful. It sounds like you're really prepared to march forward as safely as possible. So, I've been wondering about the World Health Organization, and what do they recommend to parents about the radio frequency exposure at home?
The World Health Organization recommends that parents reduce the RF exposure for their children. They encourage them to reduce and limit device time because they do claim that children are more sensitive to environmental agents. And they do recognize that their skulls are thinner, that wireless radiation penetrates more deeply into their brain, so that they also have an understanding of the cumulative effects too. And their concern is that children will have a greater lifetime exposure to wireless signals in the microwave range than adults today.
That sounds good. And I know that the World Health Organization is one of the many agencies that are charged with protecting us. So it sounds like they're well aware of the downsides of this technology. So just one question, why in the heck are they radiating our students 24/7 at school? Shelley, do you know if there are other countries with more stringent guidelines to protect children?
Yes, France, Taiwan, and Belgium have stricter guidelines to protect children. So there's a ban on Wi-Fi in daycare centers and nurseries for children under the age of 3. Wi-Fi must be deactivated when not in use. And in Taiwan, parents face a fine, actually, if children under the age of 2 are using smartphones or tablets. In Belgium, it's illegal for people, the industry, to market cell phones for children under the age of 7.
That's good. We could do well. I know you're in Canada, I'm in US, but we, meaning the non of these other countries, we could do well to follow their lead. So that tells us a lot. But are schools following government sanctioned guidelines, do you know?
Yes, the schools are following very closely the radio frequency safety levels, but these levels are excessively high. The BioInitiative report actually recommends that children not be exposed to levels that are greater than 10 microwatts per meter squared. And the levels that the guidelines that we have now are not accounting for the cumulative 24/7 exposure for young children. RF signals can range anywhere from 70 microwatts per meter squared to 17,000 or a little bit higher in classrooms where there's a class set of tablets or other devices in use. I actually did a test with my laptop and discovered that 5 microwatts ran the program there. So I think perhaps there's a window of or a level that we could move to that's a little closer to just what we need, not too much wireless. But students often who are sensitive and teachers who are sensitive to Wi-Fi levels report feeling sensitive at 10 microwatts per meter squared. And I'm one of those teachers that I'm sensitive. I can feel signals at 10 microwatts. So anything much higher, I start to feel uncomfortable with those signals.
Sorry for your challenges there, and appreciate your sharing that. As you know, that even if we those smaller portion of population who are EHS or electrohypersensitive, that they feel it more, but that doesn't mean for those who don't feel it that they aren't being impacted, as you know, and it's all cumulative, so it just kind of stacks up. But Shelley, if you'd like to tell us, when did you know and realize that you were injured by Wi-Fi exposure?
About 10 years ago, I started to feel quite fatigued, and I had migraines that started to build. And by Thursday and Friday, those migraines would become debilitating. So it would take me an entire weekend to recover from the signals. And then I would have to start my next week again, knowing that every week I was going to be feeling sick. My sensitivity increased over the years. So the cumulative effects definitely are something to be considered.
That's just interesting that you share that. And so when you realized that you were becoming ill from Wi-Fi, were you then concerned for your students being around the exposures as well?
Yes, I realized that when Wi-Fi signals can have a negative impact on me, I became very concerned about how these signals were affecting young children because their bodies are much smaller. I know that their cells are developing more rapidly. So in my research, I discovered that microwave radiation does penetrate their brain much more deeply. And it can create actually some epidemiological studies showed that it can spike glucose in the brain. And what that can do is it can lead to ADHD behavior. So if you have more sugar in your brain, it can actually lead to a hyperactivity, as well as there's addictive qualities to that too. The other aspect of it that concerns me is that microwave radiation also can have an effect on our hormones. And changes in hormone levels can also have an impact on anxiety and mental health, medical things as well. It can have an effect on our biology that way. So students have a lifetime of exposure to these harmful signals. And there are some students, as you mentioned, some teachers and students who are more susceptible to tumors and other things that could possibly come out.
That's really good to know, and no wonder it can be aside, as I understand, that most medical practitioners, this information is not included in their training through the traditional path. That usually you need to visit a functional medical practitioner or one who's trained with environmental medicine to properly diagnose this. And it can be tricky to dial in because, as you know, the symptoms for this run the gamut from headaches, recurring headaches, blood, nose and ear bleeds, tinnitus, dizziness, etc., all the way more serious and longer term. It can result in, the heart palpitations, heart attacks, and cancer, etc. So it's very dire. But then, like the theme of our series is that we're looking at causation, but we're also looking at solutions. So since this is involving a man-made environmental pollutants, then we have the capability to reverse these trends. So that's the good news, and that's what we're going to focus on. We are focusing on this. So it's all about enabling us to stand up against this and insist on what we need to have happen in our schools, in our environment, and to protect ourselves, because there's a lot of it that we can't do anything about, but we can certainly mitigate it a great deal. So, and just wondering if you've seen any of these negative effects inside your classroom.
Yes, over the years, I've observed an increase in activity levels, ADHD, a lack of focus, concentration, more outbursts, anxiety behaviors. Only on a few occasions do we experience lockdowns where we have to close our doors and a child is out of control and knocking on doors, and they need help with specially trained teachers, special ed teachers. These behaviors appear to be a little bit more escalating over the years, and I believe wireless devices are a contributor to this.
I was going to ask you, since you have been in this profession for almost 3 decades, that with a lot, which I think is really cool, because it's kind of going along with paralleling the proliferation of wireless technology use. So I would imagine that it wasn't too difficult to see the changes over the years. Of course, you know, when they happen gradually, it's like when you're living with something, you don't notice it. As if you step away for 5 years and come back, you're really going to notice the drama. But I bet you were able to connect the dots and think, well, kids didn't have smartphones, you know, 10 years ago to speak of, and that you see this escalating. I've heard this occasion. I saw a video recently about a situation, I believe it was in the Portland, Oregon school district. A local reporter there did a series called Crisis in the Classroom, and she had interviewed teachers, principals, parents, and local police, I think, from the area, talking about where they would talk about these different violent outbursts where the children would, I mean, like, get a teacher down on the ground and pull the hair and scream, run out into traffic, and where the teacher has to go running after them. It's just like, oh my goodness. But they don't mention that it could have to do with this technology. They talk about, you know, other things that not necessarily related. So I sent them a little message, kind of an FYI, that they might want to look into. So that's pretty interesting. But
I know that when I'm sensitive and the migraines are building, it's really hard for me to be that patient, lovely teacher I'd like to be. So if it affects me or has that impact when you're feeling not well, you can't operate optimally. And I think that the children also can't operate optimally if they're sensitive to these signals.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's not just children behaving badly just because they want to be mischievous or the class bad guy or bad gal. So, but yeah, that's such a good point. But, you know, I bet you have all sorts of stories. So is there an incident that stands out in your mind about a child who was sensitive to Wi-Fi?
Yes, I remember one time just having that aha moment. I realized that this child in my class had sensitivities at the same time I did. So when I felt a head pain, that child seemed to be responding to the same thing. And I remember being in the gymnasium, and I remember that little child feeling a strong head hit or a head zap. And he came crawling over to me and said, "Ms. Wright, my head really hurts." And I thought, oh my head really hurts too. And I felt that same signal. And my heart went out to him because I thought, wow, so he's going through something very similar to me. And I just turned to him and I said, take some very big, deep breaths, and just take some deep breaths through the pain and come back and let me know when you're feeling better. So he kind of scuttled over, sat down, took some deep breaths. I watched him. And then I was engaged in the assembly and my head stopped hurting. And I thought, he's going to come back in any second and let me know that he's doing better. And yes, within a few seconds, he said, I'm feeling better now. Now, the pain does escalate, but it just goes to show you that these signals can have some effect on young people as well as adults.
That's amazing. And do you believe in that instance? I'm assuming that you were also deep breathing while he was deep breathing and you felt better. Was it the deep breathing, do you think, or the moving away maybe from source, or maybe both, that helped you both feel better?
Actually, we couldn't move away from the source. So wireless radiation does cause oxidative stress. So boosting your oxygen in your body can actually alleviate temporarily some of the pain. It doesn't alleviate all of it. So what I've discovered through my deep breathing is that it can alleviate some of the pain.
That's really good to know. That's really a good tip. And so, when you have the pain and it goes away, does it go away promptly, or is it a residual pain? Is there a little bit of a ghost pain left over, or how does that work?
Absolutely. There's some kind of, there's a residual effect. So when the sharp zap, the sharp pain, the electromagnetic signal interfering with the electromagnetic signal of the head, when that happens, there's a sharp pain, and that can increase to a point where you have to leave the area. But there's also a residual pain where when that zapping stops, your brain continues to build in terms of head pressure, and you get a more latent effect that can last for hours later with a building migraine. So the head pressure becomes so great. And I remember before I learned to move away from wireless signals, I could be curled up in a ball for days or very many hours until I went to see an environmental doctor and developed some strategies to manage that pain a little bit better and understand that I needed to avoid areas where the signal strength is very high.
Oh my goodness. And well, you've certainly done your homework, and I've heard so many stories, so many experts, advocates, those of us who are speaking out are coming from a place where we've had personal experience that's kind of driven us through a process of elimination to try to find out what the heck is going on. And it seems kind of similar to when you have an allergy to a food or an environmental toxin that you don't know which one, but you have to go through a battery of tests to try to figure out if it's dust, mold, bananas, peanuts, whatever. And doesn't it kind of seem similar process when you're trying to, find that needle in the haystack?
Exactly. It is very difficult, and some people go undiagnosed. Some people are getting invasive medical exams, CAT scans, or MRIs to try to figure out why they have these debilitating migraines. And unfortunately, these kinds of medical procedures are not going to show that you are electromagnetically sensitive. So there are doctors trained in environmental medicine who will recognize the signs, but there are very few of them in North America. So understanding that this could be an environmental impact, those are the doctors that can actually help us. The regular family doctors may not be aware of electromagnetic sensitivity.
That's great. That's great to know. And I did want to point out for the viewers that there will be a link to reference citations below in the comments section. And we will look to include a link to a directory to physicians who have been specializing in environmental medicine throughout the United States, Canada, the world, that you can seek out if you have questions along these lines. So Shelley, can you think of a real life example that we could relate to, those of us who maybe haven't experienced this exactly? I've gotten a little taste of it. I've experienced vertigo and tingling in extremities. So I know I'm sensitive somewhat, but I do a lot to try to keep myself from exposure, because I know it's cumulative and I don't want to get to so I am EHS, but I know it probably wouldn't take much to get to that level.
To describe it to people, it's like an electrical shock. I try to tell people that if you have a 9-volt battery and you stick your tongue on the battery, you get a little shock. It's very tiny. With each additional shock, if you increase the voltage and increase the voltage of each battery to increase the shock as you stick your tongue on it. That would be what we feel like. We are called the zap generation. With every additional signal, that signal strength appears to be increasing inside our brain. So it hurts more with every additional signal. The difference is that when you stick your tongue on a battery, the pain goes away as soon as you take your tongue off. But for those of us who are electromagnetically sensitive, the pain doesn't go away. And then we get that residual building migraine, and the migraines can be very debilitating. And that's at the point where we have to walk away.
Wow, that's really helpful to have that example. Thank you. So with all of that you've been through, have you become concerned about the safety of your own children inside their classroom?
Yes, I have children that are school aged, and I've always coached them to, they go to a library with a study area, that they need to find one without an access point in it, and if possible, use their hardwired devices. Most libraries do have that available. So I also told them that they are not allowed to use their wireless devices around their friends. To make it simple for them to understand, I said wireless radiation is actually worse than smoking, because many people that have smoked, it would take decades before any tumors would show. However, for those who are users of our technology, for example, cell phones, and they use them in close proximity for many hours at a time. I know of a woman who developed breast cancer within 4 years of constant use. So my concern is that not everyone is using these devices as recommended by manufacturers. And because of that, radiation tumors are likely going to surface. And I was concerned about that. So I'd encourage my kids to use, if they were using a device, to use it in airplane mode and walk away from the crowd if they were going to send a message. Now we've learned how to use our technology using hard wires.
Great advice for your children. Sounds good. Sounds good. So where do you go during your off times, during the times that you're preparing for class?
So if I'm in a classroom with an access point, I need to get out of that area as much as possible. And staff rooms and other common areas generally do have access points too. So I found that down in a more isolated hall would be where I do my marking, just to make sure that I wasn't close to the signal so I can last the whole day. And those areas seem to be the best for me, although they're a little distracting if there's students in the halls, but it worked out better for me because I'm sensitive.
Yes, good. And I can also imagine that by your taking these measures, you're giving a message to others who are observing you do this. You know, you're kind of proving your point that wonder why she's doing that. So I think that adds to your own advocacy for this cause. Are you concerned about students using devices on their laptops on their lap?
Yes, I have also coached my own children as well as students that laptops are desktops. They don't belong on the laps. And our young girls are born with 400,000 eggs at birth. So radiating gonads in young children is not okay. And the cumulative exposure, as I've mentioned before, is something that we need to be concerned with. So using those desktops on desks is really important for this.
I'm glad you mentioned that this technology not only harms the children's brains and bodies, but also future generations of both boys and girls. So, yep, very important. So given what you know now, Shelley, do you believe that school boards ignore government-sanctioned levels, that they should ignore government-sanctioned levels and follow independent science recommendations?
Yes, I think that school boards actually have been told by the wireless industry and the WHO that Wi-Fi is completely safe at the levels, at the guideline levels that they have mentioned. Now we're finding that there are many negative biological effects at levels that are lower than that. And I think school boards need to put health and safety of the students first, take a look at these independent science studies, because these are showing negative biological effects at lowers far lower than what the WHO is recommending. And we need to make sure we are not taking a look, or the school boards are not taking a look at industry-funded science that is protecting their corporate interests. The weight needs to be absolutely, I would say, entirely on independent science.
Excellent.
Hardwiring is faster, it's more consistent, and it's 100% safe.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So when you fantasize about your ideal wired classroom, what does that look like?
Yes, I do have a dream that I would have an ergonomic classroom with like an IT suite, maybe like a Google IT suite, where there's lots of stations, IT stations throughout the room with webcams, laptops, iPads, and different centers that the kids can use. They would attach their devices to either a lightning adapter or an Ethernet cable. They would be able to roam around the room. They would be trained to use devices in airplane mode if they're not accessing it by the Ethernet, because you can download programs with the cable, with the Ethernet cable, and then disconnect, put it in airplane mode, and roam around and use it as you would like. So I think I would love to have an IT suite like that, where the information can be delivered quickly, safely for all students, and it's environmentally positive. No paper.
I'm going to hold the vision. You have that in your near future. So what do you do at home to keep your own children hardwired?
We have 5 landline phones at home. We also have 6 hardwired computers. So I can Facebook message my children and text them on the hardwired computer. We have lightning adapters which attach Ethernet cables to their cell phones, so information can be downloaded easily with that. And we have hardwiring throughout our house, so my son or daughter could be lying in their bed and connect their phone into the wall, and it works really well. So my kids don't have difficulty doing that. They know there's different places in the house where they can hardwire, and they download everything safely without microwave radiation. And I would love a smart home someday, but it would have to be all hardwired.
That's interesting you say that. We're working on a roundtable about the dark side of the smart home technology, but we'll be talking about also how a home could still be smart and still, be technologically savvy, yet not so dangerous. But we'll be getting into that. So what would your advice be for other parents, how they could keep their children safe at their homes?
Cell phones don't belong in the bedroom, so unless they're in airplane mode. Alarms work for parents. If parents would like to keep their cell phones at their bedside table, they can operate that, as well as photos. There's so many things that can operate on your cell phone without the use of the wireless connection. But children need to have all their devices maybe in a central location somewhere in the house at night. It's also distracting. Some children will want to play with these devices at night when they need their sleep for school the next day. So all the devices should be placed in a central location and in airplane mode, so that children won't be exposed to that. So there are many studies that show that wireless radiation in the microwave range interferes with the release of melatonin at night. So melatonin is a healing chemical that's released in our bodies during our dark nighttime sleep. So we don't want any devices up there. And if it's at all possible, it is good to get a cheap $10, $15 timer. It's like a light timer attached to the router, so that it turns the Wi-Fi signal off at night.
Definitely great tips. I read recently this one family found it very helpful in their home that they have a no tech policy for an hour and a half before bedtime, an hour and a half after they get up in the mornings, and the whole family sleeps better, and they just function a lot better without that. So we can do without our addictive behavior. Sometimes these things can lead to addiction, as you know. But so as we're nearing our rounding up, Shelley, what would you say would be next steps we all can take?
I think that parents can urge school boards to provide annual safer use technology updates that include government guidelines promoting reduced RF exposure for children at home and limiting device time, and to follow manufacturer warnings when they're using all their devices. Many parents aren't aware of these things, and I think these technology updates from schools would help greatly in reducing the RF exposure.
Sounds like great advice. So, and what would you say parents and school boards could request of the World Health Organization along these lines?
So parents and school boards could urge the World Health Organization to revise those guidelines that they currently have, to give weight to the independent science that is out there, not tied to the industry. I believe that students need safer guidelines that reflect their vulnerability, that reflect the cumulative effects of a lifetime exposure, as mentioned in the World Health Organization website.
Absolutely, and I'm going to hold the vision that they're going to heed that advice and those requests. So, what can parents and school boards request from the industry?
So I think parents and school boards can actually push the industry to continue manufacturing devices with Ethernet ports and creating safer wired devices for children. I've done this myself. I've written letters to encourage this because we want all of our devices at home hardwired.
Absolutely. And I have heard that it's becoming a little bit more and more challenging to find devices out there that come equipped so you can make them safer. So we need to hold them accountable for doing the right thing with that. So here we have come up to the end of our session, Shelley. I think we've covered an awfully lot of important ground that I'm sure is going to be very valuable for everyone listening. So guys, I'd like to thank you for your time and for all your service for almost 30 years. It's so impressive. You know, there's no better job. I mean, you're a mother, and for your children, I mean, I just admire that type of work so much. And I know I speak for so many others to thank you for all you do to care for our children, to not only help them educate, but in a low, no, ideally, radiation zone. And so that is great. And thank you so much for your time. And for all you viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. And if you would kindly give us a like, a comment, share with others who you feel would benefit from this information, that would be wonderful. I often say this is for anyone who loves a child. So that's what we're doing this for. And thank you very much for tuning in. Again, Shelley, thank you so much for your time. Bye for now.